go from the beginning. So this is a short talk. And what I'm going to talk about is a kind of a vision of how I would conceive a science of planning, right? And like the main kind of thrust of the talk is going to be that we need less theory and more experimental results. That we have enough theory. There's theory coming from everywhere, but we don't have enough experimental results and experimental data, right? To kind of justify as to why some of these theories might be correct, right? And I mean, what are we trying to do here, right? Why is planning of any importance? And for that, I would go back to what I tend to think of as the average definition of what the good life is. And I think this is far more universal than what we would like it to be. I took this from it's a magazine published in the 50s, and it has to do with American exhibitions, right? And the quote is about like a very concrete definition of the good life, which is really consumerist, if you like that, right? So it involves you having washing machines, dishwashers, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, everything that you would consider that the modern household would have. Having a house, obviously, and the house being in the suburbs, right? That's a very American notion of the good life, right? And that kind of trick, I mean, that's been exported more or less since the 50s, 60s. Switch sides. Now, if that's a version of the good life, you might want to ask, is this kind of being realized, right? So a version of the good life is I have lots of stuff and lots of free air, right? And I can go around and have fun. And again, if you go back in the 50s and the 60s, there were even discussions from Nixon about 4-day week, right? Not just, I mean, everyone was having a kind of a very positive notion of what the good life is, right? The question is this being delivered by the market? And there's an argument you can make that it's not being delivered by the market. So what the market has promised, all this society of abundance, it's not really delivering. And I mean, this is debatable, but you can see, I'm going to use a couple of plots that have been very popular. You can see how the market kind of undervalues certain things, like houses, undervalues to you as a kind of as a need to a consumer, like, and certain other things are truly cheap. They're being overvalued. So, for example, TVs are like they're really cheap. I mean, they went down in price massively. So let's say we're in a bizarre situation where basic commodities are extremely expensive, and stuff that could be considered luxuries are getting cheaper and cheaper, right? And I will kind of point to the second chart, and I mean the previous chart was from the US. Here's another chart from the UK, and it kind of, again, very popular. It again says the same story, that house prices compared to the median wage have gone massively up, right? So is it a bubble? Is it just normal? So it's not really clear that the conception of a good life that has been promised in the 50s is actually being delivered by the market. And for me, that's like the starting point for any discussion of these things. Now, I mean, there has been an effort to create a historical alternative, and this must not be kind of forgotten, right? The historical alternative was planning, right? And I have a quote here from a book that kind of discusses that. And the discussion goes something like, planning was socially supposed advantage by East Germany's first plans had no idea how the planned economy should function. There was no book on planning until 1950s, but ultimately planning did not. I mean, it failed as well to deliver the good life, right? So for me, there's a kind of a clear. There's an issue here. We had the market as a mechanism of delivering the good life, and we had planning as a mechanism of delivering the good life, and none of them has delivered, right? So what do we do next, right? So I mean, the first thing that it's worth noting is that the only really existing economics that people believe in are market economics, right? Non-market economies are retreating everywhere, right? I mean, the failure and the demise that has happened to the non-market world should not be kind of underappreciated, right? And that's why we have an impasse. I mean, you look at Cuba lately, they're trying to move from a non-market economy to a market economy, as if there is no other alternative, right? I mean, the loss is, in historical terms, astounding, in my view, right? And there's no indication this is likely to change, right? So it's not clear at all that, you know, people believe in the possibility of an alternative because of historical failures. So the question for me would be, how do we even go about restarting this process where an alternative, whatever that is, becomes possible, right? And here it goes. Can we create a scientific program that will deliver a science of alternatives? So, like in the second slide, I said that the first planning textbook was written in 1956. Can we write another planning textbook, right? Can we create real examples of successful non-market economies to draw inspiration from? Like create stuff that's very tangible. Specialized venues and journals where we discuss these things. I mean, and you know, learn societies where, I mean, the equivalent of IEEE, for example, or, you know, Society of Mechanical Engineers, where again there are discussions about non-market economics and how they would look like. So I would say that we are at the very, very early stages of anything that would look like a normal scientific endeavor, right? And I would kind of try to point out into ways we think about science and how this endeavor should play out. Now, there's this talk which has been quite famous, and the talk goes something like this. This is by Jim Gray, a Turing Award winner, and this was in his acceptance speech, I think. Thousands of years ago, we had the empirical branch of science, where you basically observe stuff, wrote them down, and then you a few hundred years we had the equations of gravity, equations of molecular mechanism, the theoretical branch, right? And then at the end of the 80s, we had the computational branch, which is mostly simulations. And the way we do science today is that we kind of combine real and simulated data, and then we draw inference from that. Now, I think planning, and the way we approach planning at the moment, is at best as a science of simulations, right? Which were really popular, agent-based models and the rest, but I don't think they tell us anything. So let me.
Hey guys, can you please mute?
If you look at any planning proposal,
can you mute Dick's audio, please?
Most of them, right? One imagines a completely fictional economy. And by the way, this applies to my research as well. I mean, I'm not just kind of complaining about others. I'm complaining about past previous version of me, right? So the general idea goes something like this. There is a fictional economy, right? Made up by fictional quantities. Someone runs optimizations or a kind of simulations or any kind of algorithm from them, right? Draw some conclusions from that completely fictional economy, more or less by integrating various theoretical models that have been propagated through other fields of science, right? Adds a bit of their favorite sauce, a regularization, approximation, multi-objective optimization, whatever, right? And then they come up with a proposal, right? But a proposal that came purely, from theoretical thinking, is just a hypothesis with no experimental validation. It's just made up stuff, right? And yes, the made up stuff is based on certain theories, but they are of no, they're completely made up. Like it's surprising to me that we are not moving further than that. Now, I think a large part of why this is happening is our kind of very close conception of science that came from the creation of the atomic bomb. But before going there, there was another field that has been kind of like this heavy computational approach. People have called it fact-free science, right? And they call this fact-free science because effectively you do simulation after simulation after simulation, and then you go and link the simulations and claim that the simulation is reality, right? This is quite a few economists do, but without kind of inputting any facts. So you end up with endless debates about what version of something is better or what should we do. But in practice, you are in no way to kind of make a judgment as if something would work better in reality or not, right? So you are in the realm of, I'd say, theology at this point, right? So how do we go about changing this? That would be my interest. How about we go and ground the science of planning, or whatever we decide to call it, with the real world. So the first thing I think is we need to collect data on a vast scale, right? On a scale that's comparable to what people did when they created LLMs, internet scale, terabytes of data on housing, electricity, food consumption, surveys of what people want, right? But I would go without surveys first, but whatever data there is, right? And on a really granular level, as a granular level as possible, right? So what do people consume? How often do consumer products need replacements? What is the timelines of consumption, right? And the link with production as well. How is consumption spread around the world? I mean, who's producing and who's consuming, right? What other formats impacted beyond availability, right? What are the externalities of consumption? So yeah, you consume stuff, it destroys other things, right? But not on a theoretical level, but on a really practical level, right? I drink, a cup of coffee contains it has this supply chain, and it's consumed by that many people every day. So on a data on a really granular level. We need to do the same on data with productions. So supply chains, right? What is the supply chain for your coffee? I'm bringing coffee cup as an example, but exactly, I mean, which factories process it? Where is it produced? So understand those forces, like the force of production, close up. Again, data per production unit, right? Who makes those commodities? What are the methods used? Where are these commodities produced, which I think is really important as well? What are the routes that will bring these commodities here? Where is labor needed? And exactly how much labor needed is who's doing these jobs. And I think, where we see automation, does it ever come in? I don't think it does that much, right? How deep are the supply chains? How easy is it to wreck those supply chains? So these kind of things, right? Okay. And then the question becomes, how do you attempt to collect such data, right? And people have done that for other fields, and it's web scraping, data journalism. You look at port logs, ship logs, surveys, and consumer reports. You talk to academics that just do that, like economists that just deal with consumption. And I'd say that you need a serious amount of funding to go about and collect all that data that would allow you to be able to kind of say something about what's going on in the world, right? Now, move to the next slide. Then the other thing that goes back to me doing games, in AI and games in general, there's been this tradition of creating benchmarks, right? We compare ideas because we have a clear benchmark, poker, Go, StarCraft, custom games. And then people would go along and create a game player. And whoever kind of won in that sense, whoever created the better game player is able to kind of, showcase that their model is better, right? How do we compare models of planning? Like, can we even say that one creates a better model than somebody else without making a ton of theoretical arguments that in practice, someone can kind of discover hidden confounders and kind of kill them or create a kind of a theological debate again. And finally, I'd say that even those three are not enough, and I think this is the biggest problem of doing any kind of research of this type, we need experiments, right? Everything we've collected so far is observational data. And observational data is really problematic, right? You can invoke hidden confounders and keep a debate going forever, right? Using observational data. There's very little you can do to kind of make it certain that there's a causal pathway you understood, right? And in order to understand this causal pathway, you need experiments. Now, experiments are hard, right? I mean, if you want to think about it, how do you know that smoking is bad? So if someone asks the question, how do you know that? I mean, through observational studies, there hasn't been an experiment on smoking, right? So no one took a group of people, forced them to smoke, took another group of people, forced them not to smoke, and then detected. So because there hasn't been an experiment on smoking, I mean, if you look at the arguments that happened at the time, I mean, it's insane, right? So you need to have natural experiment or some kind of experimental data to supplement your observational. So how do you do this experiment? Not sure, right? This is, I think, one of the hardest parts that anyone in this field will face. Is there an underclass in Europe or in the world that would be happy Other people that would find the current mode of living not as satisfactory enough, that would be willing to try new things. Maybe not. Maybe there aren't any, and this, this whole endeavor is a fantasy. But maybe there are. Maybe there are people who would like to have a different life, and they can go and start testing those pet theories somewhere, right? And I don't think anyone's going to bother you as long as you're not a country or a state, right? If you're a small community somewhere, no one's going to say anything because you're insignificant in terms of power levels. And people have tried stuff like that, but on the web. Like they create these artificial societies and they kind of say something about them. I'd say that this is like completely fake. I mean, we are physical beings with a physical body, and what constrains us is the fact that we have bodies and you need to eat, right? Not your kind of. So, I mean, I haven't answered, and I'll try to give a brief answer. Compared to the previous speakers, I haven't said what a thing that needs to be done. I'm going to spend a slide talking over it. So this is the topic of a completely different presentation, but I think that we have disassociated consumption and production quite a lot. All production doesn't happen in the West. We're all consumers now. And that's why we tend to think of models. We tend to think of ourselves as buyers from Amazon, and every model of planning we're going to create will end up being a better Amazon, right? And products will come from somewhere magically. It's going to be somebody else creating them and delivering them to us. So I would say there's an upcoming paper that I have on this, that you need to reintegrate production and consumption, and you can do this by, on a central level, planning centrally for products that are not assembled, and those products are assembled inside your property, right? A kind of a Lego economy, which will give you really great individual autonomy, as you'll be able to kind of create your surroundings the way you'd like them to be. But then again, this is just a hypothesis, right? And I'll have soon a paper kind of saying why I think this is true, but without experiments, it's still kind of made up stuff. So kind of counter arguments to the whole thesis that I've put together. If you remember, like, I've started this discussion by kind of discussing what the optimal life is. And there's, I think, this implicit fantasy that the optimal life is the consumerist American kind of lifestyle, right? And to be honest, no one has managed to create any other alternative that I see as sensible, and no other fantasy has gone around. So people can say, how about you? We don't consume that much, or we do other things. And I don't think that's a viable alternative. I do not think there's any indication that anything like that is likely to happen, right? The same model, at least for the moment, is the one that's kind of, it's dominant. It's way too dominant, right? You can also say that I'm putting way too much focus on production, labor, and consumption. And there are indeed other forces that shape our lives. Yes, sure, I agree with that. So no, I mean, that's why you need experiments, because there are confounders that you cannot assess. But if anything, I think that this kind of science or research field should focus more or less towards the forces of production, labor, and consumption, and how they affect society. And I would say that this is by far the most important thing and the most important problem we're facing today. But I would like to acknowledge that there are other problems in the world, rather than, you can think of this type of research as I like my washing machine way too much, right? But yeah, I think that's really important. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you. So that's great. So basically, I'll